to be a more extended version of what you saw 2 weeks ago at the center. The records will look the same. Some of what I say will be the same. But what I'll do today that's different is that I will actually tell you how you can find the records yourselves, since you are here today. And you can do a little bit of this work on your own. Also, some of you have been corresponding with our staff by email. And so some of you will be looking at original records. You've already gone through this process, and you'll have some time in our research room today. So again, let me introduce myself. I'm Marisa Louie, and I'm an archivist here on staff at the National Archives at San Francisco. We have a number of our other staff members who have given up part of a Saturday to be here and work with you all. Marcy Goldstein is our Director of Archival Operations, and Bill Green is another staff archivist. And Joe Sanchez, who is getting all of you signed in, is another archival staff as well. So feel free to ask the four of us anything as you go on your research throughout the day. If we don't know the answer, and there are plenty of things that I have no clue about, but we will definitely try and kind of find out an answer for you. Okay, so to get started, what is an archive? What is an archive? Anyone have any quick guesses to this question? What is an archive? What makes an archive different than a library? Anyone?
Multimedia.
Okay, multimedia. Okay.
Historical documents.
Historical documents. Anyone else? So what might you find at a library that you won't find at an archive, or what might you find in an archive that you won't find at a library? Like if I was to go down to my San Francisco Public Library on Larkin Street in San Francisco.
Circulation, yes.
Circulation, okay. So at a library, you can check things out. You have them for 3 weeks. You can sit, in your bed and read them. But you can't necessarily do the same thing with what you might find here in our holdings. An archive has original materials and materials that are often unpublished. These materials are one of a kind. You might not find them anywhere else. Whereas a library has things, that you might go and find at your local bookstore, things that you can take out, things that are products of people's research, oftentimes in archives. So that's what the difference between an archive and a library might be. These are all examples of things that you might find in an archive, not just things like papers, but also things like multimedia, film, photographs, maps. These are all considered archival materials. So back before the National Archives came into existence, records of the federal government were stored in all kinds of places. The Library of Congress, for example, kept the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. The U.S. Commerce Department kept the U.S. censuses. And every federal agency maintained its own records and was responsible for taking care of them. In 1934, in response to many losses of these records, Congress enacted the National Archives Act. And this photograph is a picture of records of the Veterans Administration being wheeled into a fumigation chamber en route to joining the holdings of the National Archives. So, as the National Archives is taking in these records and creating the first consolidated holdings of federal records across the country, you can see that some work had to be done. We don't want visitors coming in that we didn't necessarily want. This is a copy of the National Archives Act of 1934. And this is the building where the National Archives is, just off of the mall in Washington, D.C. Have any of you set foot in this building before? Anyone been in to see the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, waited in that line to get in? Okay. So nowadays, there are public exhibits for the public to come and see, examples of famous documents in our holdings. And if you were to go around the back of the building, that's the entrance for researchers to go in, where you can sit and do original research in the records that are open to the public. This is the mission of the National Archives. We safeguard and preserve the records of our federal government. We ensure that people can discover, use, and learn from these documents. We ensure access to these documents, not only to you as American citizens, but to people around the world. We don't open up our archives just to American citizens. anyone can come on in and look and see what we have. We support democracy, promote civic education, and facilitate a historical understanding of our national experience. And we just don't do this in Washington, D.C. We do this in facilities around the country. We are one of 13 regional field offices for the National Archives. And the National Archives also includes the presidential libraries, which we have 2 here in California. That's where we are today. So I thought what I would do, and this is again similar to my presentation 2 weeks ago, is I will talk first, I'll kind of talk about 2 mainstays of records that I think are unique to people of Japanese American heritage. And that would be immigration and naturalization records, and records relating to internment. And I'll also talk about some census and military records, but I think that immigration and naturalization and internment, I mean, those 2 things are really unique to the Japanese American experience. Okay, so how many of you have been to this building? Or the building behind this? Where is this?
Angel Island.
Angel Island. Angel Island Immigration Station. So Japanese immigration to the U.S. mainland and to Hawaii began in the 1880s, such that by 1900 there were over 24,000 Japanese living on the mainland and over 60,000 in Hawaii by 1900. However, anti-Japanese labor agitation resulted in the Gentleman's Agreement of 1907, and I'm sure that affected a lot of your families, in which Japan agreed that they would not issue visas to any more Japanese laborers. However, if you were Japanese and if you were already here by that time, you were permitted to bring over your wives and your children. So let's start by taking a look at immigration records. So we can start with someone's arrival in the U.S., which is documented on a ship passenger manifest list. And this is a ship list for some folks who are coming in from Kobe to San Francisco in 1915. And again, for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to focus on one individual here. Her name was, let's see here, Umeno Nakadate. And you guys will find these passenger lists on microfilm publication M1410, and that's noted down on that sheet that you have. So let's learn some more about Umeno and what her life was like when she was coming in. When you look at the passenger list, these different columns of information will tell us that she was 29 years old and she was a housewife. Her last permanent residence was in Okayama, and she left behind her father, Magashiro Nakadate. And all of this information is here right in front of us on this passenger list. So then, okay, so I know Umeno came in. Well, what happened to her after that? I'm going to go now to another microfilm publication, which is M1388. Actually, now that I think about that, I don't think that's on your list. But M1388. And that's the record of the Board of Special Inquiry for San Francisco. This is a record that lists people who were detained at Angel Island Immigration Station, and they may have had to appear before the Board of Special Inquiry, which was a board of 3 people who would decide whether you had the right to enter the United States or not. Here is Umeno down here, and this is always impossible to read. I don't know why I bother showing this like that. But there are some interesting things to note, and Bill, do you want to point this stuff out? We don't have laser pointers, so I use it.
If I can even see it myself.
Okay, sorry. So when you guys go and when you look up your family on this microfilm publication, if they came into San Francisco, these are some things you'll want to look out for. The first thing is a notation that says PB, and what do you think PB could have stood for? If she was a Japanese housewife coming in on her own, coming to meet her husband. She was a picture bride, exactly. And then you'll see the notation under the admitted column with the date, 9/23/15. Let's see, the date, admitted column would be there, so look there on the microphone. And that's September 23rd, 1915. So she was detained at Angel Island from her arrival on September 20th, 1915 until September 23rd. For 3 days, she was held at Angel Island. And finally, the last thing that we'll see, and this is right next to her name, is something that says November 16th file. And this typically indicates that there may have been a case file created for her with additional records beyond, the passenger list and this. Now you'll note that not everyone on this list has something next to their name or it's stamped and says file. We really kind of find it arbitrary as to whether someone had a file created for them or not. So, your grandmother may have also been a picture bride and may have also come through Angel Island, may have also been on this list and detained and everything. But, unless there's something there that says file for her, maybe she didn't have a file. Okay. So I went and checked our holdings, and lo and behold, we actually do have a case file for Umeno. A little bit of luck. So now let's take a look at some of the documents from her case file. One thing that's really common in these case files are the pictures themselves. So this is a photo of Umeno and a photo of her husband, Yoshichiro Nakatachi. We don't necessarily know whether these are the photos that they would have exchanged as they were entering their photo marriage. Something else that you might find are letters of support that would have been submitted as evidence of her husband's standing in the community. I believe he was a farmer living in Parlier, California. And so this is a letter, one from his bank and then one from someone who knew him as a farmer, saying that he's an upstanding individual, that he's honest, sober, and straight in his dealings. There's a quote from one of the letters. Other things that you might find in these case files will include transcripts of their interviews before the Board of Special Inquiry. So, we have this case file, and I wanted to find out a little bit more about Umeno. And so I went to the census, and I found her in the 1930 census. And I found that in the census that she had 2 children, a daughter, Yoshiko, and a son, Akira. And the family went to Gila River, and they were interned at Gila River during the war. So yes, it is possible to kind of go on and find out more about these random individuals that I select for my presentations to research. So something to keep in mind as you think about your family and whether they kind of fit into this phenomenon of being a picture bride, is that the picture bride phenomenon only actually continued till 1920. So if your grandmother or mother came in after 1920, odds are that she was not a picture bride. We also have records, we just looked at some San Francisco records. We also have records for Japanese immigrants coming in to Hawaii, but we have many fewer more. We have much fewer for Honolulu than we do for San Francisco. But these are some examples of what we do have for Honolulu. So thinking about these case files, how do we find your family's case files in our holdings? We have over 100,000 in our holdings, so how do we distill it down to just that one that you're looking for? One thing that you can try doing on your own is to go onto this website that's hosted by UC Berkeley, casefiles.berkeley.edu, and you can search by name. And so I searched, for example, for persons with the surname Sasaki who are coming into San Francisco, and these were all the hits that came up. And the case file number there on the second to left column is what we would need to look for something for you in our holdings. When you're searching for someone in your family who may have been a picture bride, keep in mind that you should search under both their maiden name and their married name, because it can vary as to what people came in under.
Could you repeat what was the site that you go to?
Yeah. It is casefiles.berkeley.edu, and it is on that handout that I have as well. Okay. Another way to search for people who are coming to know whether you may have a case file and to know whether to search is to use a website like this, Ancestry.com, which has digitized and indexed California passenger lists up to 1953, I believe, for San Francisco. Something else you can do is to look at a case file index that we have here on microfilm, and I think I've noted on your handouts where you'll find that microfilm in our region. This is an index that's arranged alphabetically by last name, so you can just go and look, see where you might find your ancestor by surname. Okay, sometimes when you're going through that index, you might find someone who has a number that starts with an A. If you guys see that in the upper right-hand corner? Okay, so if you guys find someone who has a number that starts with an A, this is not something that we have here in our holdings at the National Archives. These files that start with an A are known as A files, or alien files, and these, for the most part, are still in the holdings of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. I think I may have told a number of you who wrote to us, yes, we found something, but it's an A number, and you need to file a request with USCIS. This is what I'm talking about. So, if you find an index card that looks like this, carefully write down that A number, and then you will file a request with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. This tells you a little bit more about the A files, that until recently, they were not permanent records, that were considered archival records. That they eventually will come to our facility and will be available for research, but right now, they're not. And this is the form that you will use to request a copy of a file from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. They will either be done using this form, or they will be done through the USCIS genealogy program. And again, if you find one of these A numbers, you can check in with us and we can tell you exactly which method you should use to request these records. Okay. So again, this is the website for the USCIS genealogy program. Again, it is on your handouts. Do check it out. Okay. One last thing about immigration records in Hawaii. Does anyone here have family who lived in Hawaii or traveled in and out of Hawaii? Okay, so a number of you, a couple. Okay. If you find passenger lists for your family coming in to Hawaii, after the mid-1920s, check and look at this column here that says Visa Immigration Number. Okay. Visa Immigration Number. If you see something there that says CC and then gives a number, if you squint, you can see it says CC and then it gives a number, like for these folks here. That refers to a certificate of citizenship that they would have been issued and they would have used as their re-entry documents when they were coming back to the U.S. And again, these would have been for people who were born in Hawaii, who were going back to Japan for a visit, and who were coming back to Hawaii afterwards. If you find one of these numbers, we have a duplicate copy of that certificate of citizenship in our holdings. Let me show you some examples of what these look like. So they're pretty simple, sort of ID cards, but they have these great photographs, and oftentimes they may have a file number on the back. See that here. But unfortunately, we don't have an index to these certificates that we have. They are arranged by number, so if you can find us the number on those passenger lists, we can show you these duplicates. These file numbers that are on the back, unfortunately, more likely than not, we do not have a file that corresponds to these file numbers. But you can check. We do have some of these 4333 files, but not a lot. Okay, naturalization records. Who here has ancestors who became naturalized citizens? Anyone? A couple. Maybe you did. Does anyone not know that they had ancestors? Yeah, okay. If you ever find a document that looks like this in your family's papers, this is an example of a certificate of naturalization. And just with this document alone, you can go back and you can find their original petition for naturalization, which is kind of like their application to become a naturalized citizen. For this individual, I pulled this offline. She became a naturalized citizen in the U.S. District Court in New York City in 1960, I believe. The records of the U.S. District Court in New York City are held at the National Archives in New York. And so I can write to them and I can ask for a copy of her naturalization petition. I even have the number. You'll see that in the upper left-hand corner. It says petition number. So if you guys find documents like this, then you'll know, what court they naturalized in, which will tell you where to look for their petitions, and you'll even have the petition numbers themselves. We have the holdings of the U.S. District Court in San Francisco and Honolulu in our here at the archives. So I know that I pulled at least one naturalization petition for Kathleen today. And if you guys find, when you look at these documents in your family's papers, if they were also at the U.S. District Court in San Francisco, then give us a call and we can look up the petition for you. We also have indexes to some of these records, so if you think that they may have naturalized in San Francisco or Honolulu, you can check the indexes today. And I think I've given the index microfilm number on that handout. Let me show you an example. This is an example of what you'll see on the index, which is organized again by last name. And then this is a copy of the naturalization petition that we actually have in our holdings, which corresponds to Mr. Sasaki. What's really great about these naturalization records is that, one, they're organized by the person's name that they took, at the time of their naturalization. So if you don't necessarily know the name that they used when they were coming into the U.S., that's kind of irrelevant. You can just look by the name that they used later in life. Another great thing is that this gives you information about them when they were coming in. So about halfway down the page, it says here that this Ryuichi Sasaki came in through Seattle, Washington, and he came in on the SS Victoria on March 17th, 1900. And he actually used a slightly different spelling of Ryuichi than he did later in life. So these naturalization records are a great source of genealogical information, tracking all the way back to when someone first came into the U.S. Okay, so now I'm going to stop talking about immigration and naturalization records. Does anyone have any questions about what I've said before I move on? So now I want to talk about internment records. Internment records. What I can say about them is that one of the great ironies that we archivists who work with federal records deal with is that people who were documented in federal records are people who were under scrutiny of the federal government. So that being the case, all of you whose ancestors, or maybe some of you yourselves, who were incarcerated in internment camps, you are going to find a great deal of information about their camp experiences and lots of interesting genealogical nuggets in their internment records. It's kind of one of those things that you think about it as a silver lining to what your family had to go through. That then you 60 years later are left with all of this information to use to put your family history together. Think of internment records in that light. Internment records are largely held by the National Archives in Washington, D.C. and in College Park, Maryland. And so I'll talk about those, but I'll also talk about what we do have at our facility that could be of interest to you. I know I went through I used the same example at my presentation 2 weeks ago. But this is a photograph of two of the Mochida children. It was taken by Dorothea Lange. Shot on assignment for the War Relocation Authority. And these two children were being evacuated from their homes in 1942. The caption of the photograph that I found online tells me that they were part of the Mochida family and they were from Mainland. And that's really all the information that I had on them. So I wanted to find out some more. So the first thing that I did was that I went to the Archives Access to Archival Databases site, and this is the web address for them. And this is a site that's taken an index, so there were these data cards that were made for internees, and then they've digitized them and made them searchable by last name. So I searched for the last name Mochida, and there were only, let's see here, 13 entries out of 109,000. I didn't know Mochida was such a unique surname. And since I noted the caption of the photograph, it's from Hayward, I immediately saw, okay, this was the family that could have been from Hayward, these Mochidas. So the database provides you with a lot of great information, including their names, what internment camp they went to, what relocation center, what assembly center they were sent to, where they were coming from, their years of birth, which is in the far right-hand column, and their individual numbers, which is these things that start with 21585. They're on the right. Records that we have here at our facility include records of the assembly centers. So I was able to find out a little bit more about the Mochida family without having to write to my colleagues in Washington, D.C. So I wanted to show you some of these assembly center records because you will have a chance to see these today. Okay. These assembly center records that we have in our holdings are on microfilm. We do not have original records, or original paper records, and they only include the centers that are outlined there. Big one that's missing from this that I know will be unsettling to a lot of you is Santa Anita. We do not have the records of Santa Anita. But if your family was at San Fran, or if they were at Sacramento, or Salinas, or Marysville, you should certainly check this microfilm to find some of their assembly center family folders. Okay, so this is the family folder for the Mochida family. And what you'll see that it includes is when exactly they had to congregate in paper. It gives a date and a time, and when the bus came to pick them up to bring them to San Fran, their assembly center. It gives their names, their ages, where they were born, their occupations, their alien registration numbers, which are great to have as you go looking for immigration and naturalization records. And it also kind of shows you a snapshot of what the family was like at that moment in time. You'll see at the very bottom, there's someone named Hideki Fukui, who is a cousin of the family. And so when the order for evacuation came down, there was a cousin who was visiting them. It's like such a snapshot of the family at that moment that they were evacuated. There's some correspondence in these records that shows that the family, that cousin of theirs, was later transferred to Manzanar. So just kind of these little details that really provide some color as to what your family's experience was like. Other records that you'll find in these family folders include notices to report on projects at the assembly center. So the patriarch of the Mochida family, Moripi, was ordered to report to work as an administrative cook. Okay. So these assembly center records are neat because they, not only can you see them today, but they give you a snapshot of the moment of evacuation. But if you want kind of the meat of records in the National Archives about your family, you're going to want to request their evacuee case file. And this is a file that's available through the National Archives in Washington, D.C. You're going to use a form, that's like the one on the left, to request that. And keep in mind that if the person whose file you're requesting is still alive, they're going to need to provide their signed permission for the file. If they are deceased, you will need to enclose some kind of proof of death with your request. Okay. Other records that we have relating to Japanese internees. Mabel here, who's sitting on my right, these will be of particular interest to her because her family was from Hawaii and was interned on the mainland. Sorry, Mabel, but I'm not being sure yet. Okay. We have records relating to property of individuals who were interned from Hawaii on the mainland. We have kind of these property reports that they had to fill out, like how much they had in assets, who were their dependents, where were they living, where were they sent. And this is an index, one of the index cards that we have for these records. So for Mr. Hasebe, Katsuo Charles Hasebe, this is his address in Honolulu. He was interned at Camp Livingston, Louisiana. And then I could use this index card to then find this paper report, which lists all of these additional pieces of information about him. It's a paper index we have. So you have. And this is just, again, for people who are from Hawaii. Yeah. Which isn't to say that if you requested your family's evacuee case files, this information would not also be included in their evacuee case files. Okay, if your ancestor was considered an enemy alien, and if they were not sent just to one of the standard relocation centers, but were held by the Army as an enemy alien, You would be searching under a different record series at Washington D.C. So just keep in mind that there are different series of records, different places you need to check, depending on where your family member was. Okay. You can search for alien enemy case files on the Archival Research Catalog, which is available on archives.gov. I think that may be on that sheet. So yeah, lots of different sources of records for people. And as you go through your research, we archivists are always at your disposition. If you haven't found something, let us know, and we can kind of help you figure out where exactly your ancestors' records might be if they're in one of these other areas.
Is that a death certificate?
It could be.
Obituary?
Yeah, exactly. So if you don't have a copy of the death certificate because your sister has it, for example, a copy of an obituary might suffice. Sometimes you can take a picture of their headstone, like a cemetery, click and print that out. We have the Social Security Death Index is available on Ancestry.com, and you can also look them up on there. That's probably a more legitimate thing to do. So, yeah, use the Social Security Death Index. That's something that's on Ancestry. I also believe it's freely available online. Other interment records that may be of interest to you are compensation and redress case files, if your family applied for redress. If they testified before the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians during the 1980s, the transcripts of those public hearings are available through the archives. There are just lots of different sources of information about your family if they experienced internment. So again, check these different places. A lot of this is also available online on the archives Japanese American genealogy section. So check that out as well. And there's the URL for that. Okay, so that kind of ends my presentation. Well, it actually is. Oh, it does. I thought I had some stuff about military records in there, but I don't. So maybe I'll just talk about that after the class. Let's see. Did anyone grab these long legal size sheets that we had stacked over here on the table? Maybe Bill will pass these out. Okay, so when you're going through the microfilm in our public research area, you're going to see a lot of microfilm that relates to the U.S. federal censuses. I'm passing out this particular handout because this is from the 1930 census, which is the most recent census that we have, period. The 1940 census will not be out until next year. So if you are able to find your family members in the 1930 census, be it on the microfilm or using a website like Ancestry.com, you can use this to figure out what exactly each of the columns in the census means. If you print it out on our computers, it'll be like the size of this, when it would be impossible to read. So I recommend that if you find them on the computers, that you take this larger piece of paper and transcribe the information into the columns. So when you bring your little printout home, you're going to say, what is this? Like, I can't read this with magnifying glass. Okay, so do use these tools. We have these sheets not just for the 1930 census, but for previous census years as well. What else? Go through the World War II for sure. Sorry to make you. Other records that the National Archives maintains are military service records. If your ancestors served in the U.S. military, you should request copies of their records, and Bill's handing out some information about requesting World War II era records right now. So again, immigration and naturalization records, internment records, census records, military service records, these are all going to be places where you might find information about your ancestors at the National Archives. Okay, any questions?
Just a quick question. When the initial immigration happened, and the review of people at Angel Island, people were turned back for medical reasons. Is there any record of that?
Yeah. So Marcy's question was, when people arrived in the U.S. and when they were being checked out in order to determine their admissibility. When they were if they were turned back for medical reasons. So say if you had some, you were found to have some incurable disease, was there any record of that? So if you go, let's go back. Go to slide. Yes, I right here. This column here on the Register of the Board of Special Inquiry will note the cause of detention. The cause of. See what that word is for that? Cause of. It is the cause of detention. Yeah. Like, why were they being detained? And oftentimes it might note what that thing was they had. So on this column here, oh gosh, one of these columns notes if they were excluded and if they were sent back. Another question?
I have one of the sheets, and they did list things like the illnesses, the diseases, like Tacoma, TB, and
Yes.
some of the other diseases. Yeah, they have that kind of.
Great. Okay. Yes, they do list. Thank you for confirming that. I mean, and it's not just necessarily disease that might have kept someone from being admitted to the U.S. Say if you were someone who was entering into the U.S. with no visible means of supporting yourself, you would have been denied entry on the grounds that you were LPC or likely to become a public charge. Also, if you were someone who may have been suspected of having an illicit trade, such as being a prostitute, they would have also denied you entry. That was the case why many picture brides were detained, because they suspected that these men were not bringing in these women that they'd never met before to be their wife, but to be being brought in for immoral purposes. So, on that note, any other questions? Okay. So this is the perfect time for us to go on a tour of the building. We're going to take you on a brief, really quick walkthrough of our building to show you where and how we maintain our historic records. And you can leave all of your bags and your pens and your pencils here. Please leave your cameras here as well, because we're not going to allow you to take any photographs in our stacks.